Why do we repeat things? Why do we tell the same stories for thousands of years? Why do we repeat the same prayers every day? Why do ancient poems, sacred texts, and traditions survive through countless generations? At first glance, repetition seems boring. Saying the same thing again and again might seem like a failure of imagination. But some of humanity's greatest achievements are built on repetition. Homer's Odyssey repeats journeys, phrases, conversations, and identities. The Bible repeats images, stories, and promises. Catholics repeat prayers through devotions like the Rosary, and perhaps repetition survives because it does something deeply human. It helps us remember what matters. With Christopher Nolan bringing a new generation of viewers to Homer's Odyssey, we have a chance to look at why this ancient story still speaks to us. Because beneath the monsters, battles, and adventures, the Odyssey is a poem about something much more familiar: the human need to return, remember, and reconnect. Before novels, before cinema, before written books were widely available, epic poetry was performed aloud. Homer's Odyssey belonged to a world where stories lived through performance. Repetition was essential. Repeated phrases helped the poet remember. Repeated structures helped the audience follow. But Homer's repetition was not simply a memory tool. It was an artistic technique. One artistic example is how Homer says, "when dawn came." So in all instances during his whole story, he would say, "when the child of morning, rosy-fingered dawn appeared." He would say that again and again when he wanted to say, "when dawn came." But another clear example that is not artistic but showing something else appears in Book 14 of the Odyssey, during the conversation between Odysseus and Eumaios. Odysseus finally returned to Ithaca after 20 years away, but he cannot reveal himself immediately. Disguised as a beggar, he must first discover whether the people around him are still loyal. So he begins a conversation with Eumaios, the faithful swineherd. What follows is not simply dialogue, but a repeated negotiation. Scholar Elizabeth Minchin argues that this scene is structured around a repeated speech act, the bargain. A bargain has a similar pattern. Someone makes an offer, they request something in return, the other person accepts, rejects, or modifies the proposal. Homer repeats this pattern throughout the conversation. First, Odysseus offers information about his master's return, but he is secretly testing Eumaios. Does this man still love Odysseus? Eumaios refuses to believe him. He has heard too many false stories from wandering strangers. So Odysseus tries again. He promises that Odysseus is coming home and he offers an oath. Again, Eumaios refuses. Then the roles reverse. Eumaios makes his own proposal. He shares his worries about Telemachus and asks the stranger to tell his own story. Odysseus responds with a carefully crafted tale designed to gain sympathy. Again, the same structure appears. A story is offered, trust is requested, a response follows. Finally, Odysseus changes his strategy. Instead of trying to prove his identity, he tells a story about Odysseus's cleverness during the Trojan War. The hidden request is simple: give me a cloak to survive the cold night. This time, the bargain succeeds. The power of this repetition is that every repeated attempt reveals something new. Odysseus is not simply repeating himself, he is adapting. Each rejection forces him to become more creative. The repetition reveals his defining qualities, his intelligence, his patience, his ability to understand another person. But the repetition also reveals Eumaios. He is not a simple or passive servant. He listens, he questions, he evaluates. His skepticism comes from loyalty. The repeated conversation slowly transforms two strangers into people who trust one another. Why does Homer's technique feel so natural? Because repetition is part of everyday human communication. We repeat ourselves constantly. A person tells us something important and we respond, "So what you're saying is?" We repeat words to show that we understand. Parents repeat lessons to children. Friends repeat shared memories. Communities repeat traditions. Repetition creates connection. Linguist Deborah Tannen describes this as the poetics of talk. Her idea is that ordinary conversation has patterns that resemble poetry. We use repetition not because we lack imagination, but because repetition creates relationship. It tells another person, "I heard you, I remember, I am part of this conversation." This is exactly what happens between Odysseus and Eumaios. Their repeated exchanges create a shared world. This human relationship with repetition also explains why repetition is so important in Scripture. The Bible is filled with repeated words, images, and stories. Why? Because repetition is a way of remembering. In ancient cultures, stories were preserved by being spoken and heard. A repeated phrase signals importance. It tells the listener, "Remember this. Pay attention. This matters." The Psalms frequently repeat themes of God's mercy, justice, and faithfulness. The phrase, "His mercy endures forever," returns again and again. But the purpose is not simply to communicate information. The repetition allows the worshiper to participate in the truth being expressed. The words become familiar. The memory becomes stronger. The message becomes part of the person. Just as Homer's repeated structures draw an audience deeper into a story, biblical repetition draws believers deeper into faith. The Catholic Rosary is perhaps one of the clearest examples of repetition becoming a spiritual practice. The Rosary repeats prayers, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be. Someone unfamiliar with the Rosary might ask, why repeat the same words so many times? But the purpose is not empty repetition. It is meditation. The repeated prayers create a rhythm. As the words are spoken, the mind reflects on the mysteries of Christ's life, His birth, His suffering, His death, His resurrection. The beads guide the person through the prayer. The repetition creates a space where memory becomes contemplation. The words stay the same, but the person praying changes. A prayer repeated throughout life is never exactly the same prayer, because the person bringing those words is always different. This brings us back to Homer. Why does the Odyssey still matter thousands of years later? Because repetition allows stories to survive while still speaking to new generations. Every generation returns to the same story, but every generation sees something different. The ancient Greeks saw a hero trying to return home. Modern audiences may see questions about identity, memory, loyalty, and belonging. The story repeats. But we change. And because we change, the story reveals something new. The same is true of Scripture. The The same is true of prayer. The same is true of traditions passed from one generation to another. Maybe repetition is not the opposite of creativity. Maybe repetition is how human beings protect what matters. We repeat stories because they shape our identity. We repeat prayers because they connect us to something beyond ourselves. We repeat memories because some things are too important to lose. In Homer's Odyssey, repetition transforms a conversation between strangers into friendship. In Scripture, repetition preserves the foundations of faith. In the Rosary, repetition becomes a path toward reflection and devotion. Across thousands of years, one truth remains. We repeat what we do not want to forget.